Welcome to Jazz Zone Together, our new online jazz community, which we will provide jazz education resources, interviews with jazz educators and artists and celebrities, along with valuable tips and repertoire suggestions. Today, we'd like to welcome Dr. Aric Schneller, a world-renowned jazz educator, trombonist, and composer. Now I'll turn the mic over to Dick Dunscomb, who will conduct the interview. Dick, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, Dr. Aric Schneller, man, what a guy he is. You're going to really enjoy this one. He currently serves as a director of jazz studies at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. During his tenure in Sam Houston, he has made the Sam Houston University Jazz Festival into the Bill Watrous Jazz Festival and has become one of the premier jazz festivals in the United States, as well as Aric's program. It is also at that level. Aric, give us an outline of the Sam Houston Jazz program.
Thank you, Dick, and thank you, Bob, very much for having me today. This is such an honor. The Sam Houston State University Jazz program has a long history. The Jazz Festival itself is going on 63 years old, and it's the oldest festival in the state of Texas for collegiate festivals and for professional festivals. So that's a really amazing distinction to have. Some of the former directors of jazz at Sam Houston State have included such notaries as Jerry Coker, Fisher Mickey Tull, David Caffey, Bob Doc Morgan, and Rod Cannon, who is a professor emeritus at Sam Houston State. So we have quite the history there. And many students would come to those festivals early on in its tenure throughout the whole Houston region. And the program consists of two jazz bands. The SHSU Jazz Ensemble is its flagship group, which does most of the recordings we've done for the past 12 years. And then our second band, the training band, which is the SHSU Jazz Lab Band. We also have a couple of student combos, and I teach a annual jazz improvisation class in the fall, which consists of all different types of students in music. I've had many different types of instruments, but basically I start students from not being able to play jazz improv at all and getting a mix of these students who can play and who've never been able to play jazz improv to the point where they're performing transcriptions at the end of the semester. It used to be when we had this one jazz club open in town, the Stardust Lounge in a typical Texas town is a square where the courthouse is, and it's all one ways going all around the square. This club, we would actually do our performances in a club fashion in front of a live audience. Right now, I usually do these performances as a final exam in our classroom, but I'm working to get that back into a live club format to give them that flavor, what it's like to play their solos for a live audience. And then in the spring, I teach a jazz keyboard class called Jazz Keyboard Fundamentals, based on the Dan Hurley jazz keyboard book that I learned when I was at North Texas, and I teach it about the same way. And then I teach independent studies in jazz arranging. And just recently inaugurated this last fall, I started a new group called the SHSU New Direction Vocal Jazz Ensemble. And because of COVID-19, we didn't get to really perform this second spring semester. So I am almost finished with a remote recording of one of the New York Voices renditions of I Can't Believe You're in Love with Me. And I hope to have that produced. It's been a bit of a learning curve, obviously, but I hope to get that produced with a couple people I'm working with before school starts. So we're really happy and proud of the work that we're doing. And our school typically serves mostly music education majors. And I think that's very poignant. When I first started this job, I learned right away, of course, jazz lives in the schools. And it's especially so here in Texas because we have so many band programs, obviously, for the size of the state, that most, if not all, band programs have a jazz band, or more than one actually. And so I learned right away that I needed to really address jazz education, performance within jazz education and teaching. And so in the 12 years that I've been here, it's been my priority to really give the students as much information as I possibly can within a music education format, which usually consists of that they can play at least 1 to 2 semesters, preferably more, within the jazz bands, take the jazz improvisation course, take the jazz keyboard course, perform some jazz on some of the recitals. And then when they get towards the end of graduation, I usually give my students who are in the jazz bands who are graduating a chance to rehearse and direct a chart in rehearsals and or a concert, so that when they leave, they're armed with enough information and a decent amount of experience, so that when they get their first job and the head band director says, oh, by the way, you're directing the jazz band this year, then they at least have some experience and know what to do. And of course, the wonderful book that we have, The Jazz Zone Beginning, I've been recommending to all of my former students and current students, and students who've just graduated and won jobs. So it's just such a wonderful book, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I've left out. I think that about covers it for what we're doing at Jazz at SAM. The only thing I would say is that in my 12 years, we've recorded 6 studio albums and 3 live albums, 2 at Texas Music Educators, which are on Naxos of America, and at Midwest in 2014. But I really believe it's important because, Western music history, we know about our music history through written documents and through treatises and through Gregorian chant and through everything that's been written about it and the music itself. But jazz is unique in that we know our history because of recorded music. We know what our music is supposed to sound like or has sounded like, and the performance practice of it. And so I'm a firm believer, especially from going to North Texas and my experience there, that it's important to record this music and give the students give them the experience of that, because it's such a great learning tool. They learn right away how to improve their playing on the spot. And so when I get young players who come back to the band, if they've had that experience, for example, in recording one of our last albums, then it just puts them at such a higher level. And it's a record of what they did. And it contributes to jazz history. It contributes to our art form. That's a huge contributor, and I'm a firm believer in it. So, and of course, since COVID, it's really changed. It's we hear the music with our eyes too. We see it, right? We see the videos. So now that we're having to really, it's not that that's a new thing. People have been doing it for years and years, but now that we're forced into this remote situation, it's become ever more important to do that as well. Thank you, Dick.
Aric, I want to congratulate you on this beautiful program that you put together. I know that you're proud of it, and you've really turned out some students that not only are outstanding players, but outstanding educators. You mentioned North Texas. I know that when you were a member there, you were in the 1 o'clock Jazz Lab Band. Can you give us a few of the highlights of your time at North Texas?
Oh, thank you, Dick. Yes. Actually, when I started at North Texas for my master's degree in 1990, that was the year they changed the name from North Texas State University to the University of North Texas. And that was pretty special, actually. I think it was kind of different for a lot of the old timers that were going to school there, because they always knew it as NTSU. But it was kind of a wonderful thing, I think, to start my master's degree, and it started as UNT, University of North Texas. So that was special. Another special highlight, people that I work with professionally today, I don't think students realize all the time how important it is to cultivate relationships at the school level, because those are the people you're going to be working with for the remainder of your career. Case in point, when I was one of my first days walking on campus with my backpack, the first person I think I ran into was Alan Baylock, who was who is the director of the 1 O'Clock Lab Band now. And he's a dear friend of mine. I've known him since 1990. In fact, we started our first combo together at the University of North Texas my fall semester of 1990. So that's super special. It's those kind of relationships that you create. Another special thing was there was a thing called the Jazz Studies Directory, where all of our names and our phone numbers and emails were in there. You could call anybody at any time and set up a session, what we called a session. And that meant getting together and jamming. Every single day, I was meeting new people, because even then, back then, there was, I think there were at least 1,000 students going to school there and a lot of foreign students, by the way, which is something very, very special. All my friends from Germany and from different parts of Europe. That was a very special time to be there when I started my master's degree. And obviously working my way to becoming a member of the 1 O'Clock Lab Band in 1993 when we did our live album in Portugal. It's called Live in Portugal with the 1 O'Clock. That was a special album in that it wasn't your typical 1 O'Clock album sound. We were asked to perform a live concert at the Depósitos Coaxus of Music in Portugal, in Lisbon. And that was such a fast trip. It was over Thanksgiving break of 1993. And we had to perform a history of jazz, big band jazz, on that album, ending with a typical styled 1 O'Clock tune entitled Emuna Semana, which means translated in 1 week, written by Alan Baylock. And so 6 degrees of separation again there. But to make it into the 1 O'Clock was a dream of mine, especially showing up as a master's student, because the first band I made was lead trombone in the 6 O'Clock. The next semester I played jazz second trombone in the 3 O'Clock. Then I made it to the 2 O'Clock. And then I had an audition that didn't go so well, and I got dropped to the 4. But that was a special semester because we went to the Notre Dame Jazz Festival, and that's where I saw Bill Watrous again. And I was fortunate enough to win a jazz trombone award. And then I did better on my audition, and I made the 2 O'Clock and then the 1 O'Clock. And so I played a lot in the 2 O'Clock with Mr. Riggs, with Jim Riggs. Of course, we all called him Mr. Riggs. He's a very special gentleman who's a world-class saxophonist, teacher. And then, of course, Neil Slater was my director in the 1 O'Clock. Legendary conductors both, with all the music that he's composed and written. And, of course, Jim. I call him Jim now. It took a while for me. He finally started telling me, Aric, you can call me Jim now. I'm retired, because we always called him Mr. Riggs. Mr. Riggs, Jim, was very special in that he let me write for the band, and he let me scat sing with the band, and he even let me and another fellow gentleman who was a much better whistler than me whistle solos back and forth. So Jim was the kind of guy, I spent more time in the 2 O'Clock before I got into the 1 O'Clock, but the way Jim Riggs and Neil Slater worked together and just the way that they supported each other, impeccable, amazing experience. I was also fortunate that I got to sing in the Jazz Singers with Paris Rutherford, who is an amazing arranger. I took my arranging classes with Paris. And in fact, there's this unwritten book that might still be floating around the North Texas of all the Parisisms, all the things that Paris would say to us in rehearsals and in arranging. Like one example, I want this chart to swing so hard that if a mockingbird were to fly into a window, it would die instantly. Just funny little things like that. Like, or, Aric, that chord needs some friends. It needs some close friends, like major or minor seconds. Or if aliens were to come from outer space, you wouldn't give them vanilla ice cream. You give them Rocky Road or chocolate chip mint. Make that chord sound like chocolate chip mint, man. I mean, the experience was incredible. The emotional just all the emotionality, if that's even a word, being emotional, and all of the information that we got being there was just incredible. I was able to sing in Jazz Singers, but I also got to play as a horn in the pickup band for other jazz singing groups too, if the schedule didn't work, especially when I was in the 1 o'clock, because those times conflicted. I also got the amazing experience to be a teaching fellow, where I directed in my years there the 7 o'clock and the 8 o'clock lab bands, and that was invaluable experience for me to be able to do that and to learn from great teachers like them, and then to pass on that knowledge and start to develop and hone my craft, which is where I really started falling in love with the idea of being a jazz educator, actually. I'm trying to think of, and then I finished my master's degree singing opera, of all things, believe it or not. I've been a natural singer all my life, but I never had lessons. And so I started taking lessons with a friend of mine who introduced me to his teacher towards the end of my master's degree. And I started a second master's degree in vocal performance. And I was given a Winspear vocal scholarship. And before I knew it, I was singing tenor in La Boheme and Don Jose and Carmen and all this stuff I really had no business singing because I was just so green at it. But I was thrust into the world of opera. It was such an incredible experience. And lastly, my studio teachers, Dr. Vern Cagrice, the late Vern Cagrice, and Jan, his wife, Cagrice, they were so instrumental in my development as a trombone player and as a musician, because as I was because they supported my jazz training so much, but they also helped me when I was singing. I started singing lyrics to trombone tunes, where I actually sang at a couple trombone festivals, the Schulich Trombone Sonata, that another student wrote the lyrics for, and I actually sang the entire trombone sonata. So I think there's a reflexive relationship between singing and playing, obviously. Historically, Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, Sarah Vaughan, of course, Dizzy Gillespie could scat sing, Miles could scat sing. I mean, most great jazz musicians do that. Even to the point where I did my final dissertation, because at the time when I started my doctorate, they didn't have a jazz doctorate, so I did mine in performance. But I was allowed to do my final dissertation recital on jazz, and it's entitled The Pedagogical Applications of Scat Singing in the Jazz Trombone Studio. So they were so forward-thinking to let me do my specialty as my final recital and my paper. And some other teachers of note, Steve Wiest, when he had his tenure at North Texas as the 1 o'clock band director, lab band, I studied with him, directing as well as jazz trombone. Tony Baker, who is the current lead professor of trombone and jazz at North Texas, and or in classical and jazz, actually. Neil Slater, Jim Riggs, Paris. And then lastly, I'd like to thank my teacher, Laurel Miller, who was a former Metropolitan Opera singer, a studio singer, who was my vocal teacher at North Texas. So I have so many, there's so many things I could talk about, but I think, I hope what I've said helps. All I know is that when I showed up there to do my audition, I sat there and listened to the 2 o'clock lab band, and my jaw was dropped. I proceeded to listen to every single lab band that afternoon, and I knew I would have listened to the 1 o'clock, but they were on tour, and I knew I had to be there. I accepted a $200 in-state tuition scholarship, being out of state, to go to North Texas. It was the best thing I'd ever done. It's the best. It was one of the best things, just being able to meet people, to play, to take all the classes I took, to get those experiences in all facets. I mean, classical and jazz.
That's fabulous. That's really fabulous, Aric.
Thank you.
I know now that you're a performing member of the Houston Jazz Orchestra, and you continue to perform on a regular basis. Tell us, what's the jazz scene in and around Houston?
Well, before COVID-19, it was very lively. scene and very thriving for freelancers. Myself, I'm an educator, so I have a day job, but in those first 6 years before I was tenured, I really lived in Huntsville for the most part because I was working so hard to develop the program that I didn't do a whole lot of freelancing. But after that point, I've been doing more freelancing and became a member of the Houston Jazz Orchestra. And I've been doing recording sessions, some kind of jingle work, played with the Houston Jazz Orchestra, played at Cezanne's Premier Jazz Club, which has since closed down from their 30-year stint at right above the Black Lab, but now they're open in a new place. After about 6 months, they opened up in a new place. But that's when COVID was hitting, so now everything's online. But now, since COVID, I just talked to a buddy of mine yesterday, David Caceres, one of the top jazz saxophonists in Houston, and he was on his way. They finally opened up the airport jazz gig at Intercontinental Airport with Paul English, and they were so grateful to be able to play it. I mean, there's not as many people traveling through the airport, but it's still a fun job. But he's telling me, because he's more of a freelancer than I am, he said there's just no work. It's crazy. There just isn't any work. So people are trying to desperately work. They're trying to, even with face masks. We had one gig at the House of Blues. Our last gig was February, and then COVID hit, and then all of our gigs at the House of Blues once a month were totally shut down. We finally had our first gig at the House of Blues, Crossroads Restaurant, June 18th of that Thursday. And for a brief moment, it was like life was normal again. There was definitely social distancing, the tables, but we had a nice crowd. Many of my students who were just starving for live music came out. And it was just such a wonderful breath of fresh air for, no pun intended, of course, for just a brief moment in time where things were normal. But people have adapted to this. They're doing a lot of online work. A lot of the Houston Jazz Orchestra produced a remote video of an arrangement of Alone Together by Alex Navarro, who is our new jazz pianist in the group. And that's on the Houston Jazz Orchestra webpage. People can see that. Excuse me. And I think, we're all doing online teaching, which is important. I think the online aspect that maybe I've neglected for a time, I've been really trying to learn how to do it. People have been doing this for years. Obviously, Christopher Bill, Jacob Collier. I mean, he was doing this years ago and won Grammys for it. Now we're all catching up to that. But I really hope we get back to some kind of normal, not too far from now. Probably after the vaccines and after this virus runs its course, we'll be back to normal. But the jazz scene is definitely, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, it's definitely suffering right now because of this. But people are resilient. They're very positive. They're doing the best they can, and they're working as much as they can. But it's definitely tough right now in Houston.
Thanks for sharing that with us. We're very thrilled that you contributed the trombone lesson to our new jazz curriculum, Jazz Zone: The Beginning. Please expand on the material you created there and give us some of the specifics of the keys to success for young trombone students.
Thank you, Dick. It's absolutely my honor and my pleasure to have been invited to contribute a chapter to this new, first ever programmed approach to teaching and learning, beginning big band repertoire, style, technique, and performance. A synopsis of what I presented in this groundbreaking book is simply to immerse the teachers and students in this unique American art form with simple yet effective exercises and concepts to engage and to play, explore without fear of the unknown, not knowing what to play per se. And so when I drafted that particular chapter, since blues is such a inherent part of jazz, Wynton Marsalis has coined the term that jazz is blues and swing. And I know many other people have also added that jazz is blues, swing, and Johann Sebastian Bach for chord changes, and for with our song forms and with folk songs, if you will, American. I wanted to come up with some examples where students could be fearless, and even if they're classical players, which is tough to do at times, to be willing to not sound so good in the beginning, to be willing to just jump in and play and develop a sense of fearlessness to explore. I think that's really important, and I think this textbook gives all of the right information for teachers, especially because because we have a lot of teachers who are teaching jazz who may not be the jazz may not be their first and foremost study, and so but it doesn't matter because students just need a leader and a role model. And if a teacher can use these techniques to demonstrate for the students and to inspire them and light the fire, as Plutarch says, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but is a fire to be lighted. I think that's exactly where it's at, and that's what was driving me when writing this particular chapter with the blues exercises, with giving them the examples of how a trombone sounds within a section, the particular roles that they play, to light the fire and inspire to learn more. Also in that, and I also talked about scat singing. I think that connecting the voice, showing that you're hearing and that you're playing. I wouldn't be able to scat sing like I do had I not been a horn player. So my scat singing is more accurate, but I wouldn't be able to play like I do if I don't attempt to scat and sing shapes and sing style and learn the jazz as a verbatim language, which it is, by ear. Just the learning process, observation, imitation, trial and error, and positive encouragement, just like we get from our parents. I don't want to tear up right now, but that's how I feel about it. I just believe that the next step to expand upon what I was offering in the chapter 11 of the trombone is that the next step with the jazz language is obviously studying and learning transcriptions or portions thereof. You don't have to necessarily play entire transcriptions, but we live in an age now where, with YouTube and with all these wonderful educators and performers and first-time transcribers out there that are transcribing the music so that you can play the solos of your heroes, even if it's super slow. You can learn the language, and if you do enough of that and perform them. In fact, there's kind of a thing where Bill Watrous told me a story one time where Bill Watrous would learn other people's solos by ear on records and sometimes on live record dates too. And if he ever had the opportunity, he would perform portions of them for his heroes. And his heroes were Irby Green and Carl Fontana and Frank Rosolino and others, and he became friends with all three of them and revered them and loved them. And he played solos for them live. And when he told me that, I got a chance to play a couple of his solos for him. So it helped me complete that process. And, it really hits me hard because I miss him so much. Bill passed away just over 2 years ago. And he gave me a compliment one time. He said, Aric, you played that just the way I would have played it, babe. When I did a performance, and he heard me play, and it really hit me because I know I'll never sound like him. I'll never be Bill Watrous, but he was such a mentor, and you filter these mentors through you. And so I really believe that as you take these concepts that we learned from Jazz in the beginning, and then also work on transcriptions and portions and learn, memorize, and perform them, that becomes a part of your language. And one of the best things we can do is improv on tunes. But another hip thing we can do is improv off of an improv. And then it becomes yours. So I think that's something very special. A lot of great jazz artists do it. And you'd be surprised how people do a lot of it by ear. It's important to do a lot of it by ear, but there's so many great written transcriptions, and you can hear them and see them at the same time. that's one of the next, that's what I do all the time. That's, I've done that so many times for my students in the jazz improv class to help them learn to transcribe. And believe me, it's not a perfect art form in the beginning. I look at some of my earliest transcriptions and I don't know what the heck I was, it's not even close, but you get better at it, and improves your ear. The language becomes a part of you, and yeah.
Good. Well, thanks again for the chapter that you contributed, because it was really right on target. We're beginning to get feedback on our book around the country, and this is one of the favorite things that we're hearing about is your beautiful chapter that you wrote. Let's shift gears here for a minute, and would be interesting to hear you play a little bit. Maybe you could share with us what your favorite jazz tune is and play us a little bit of it.
Dick, thank you so much. This segues perfectly into what we just talked about. I like to demonstrate those concepts from chapter 11, leaning into the transcription process. I like to perform probably one of the most recorded jazz tunes in history, Body and Soul by Johnny Green, lyrics by Edward Heyman, Robert Sauer, and Frank Aiton. And I'm going to do my best to play Bill Watrous' solo, but with I'm going to improv off of his improv.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the solo he played on Body and Soul from the album I'll Play For You. And I'd like to intro into it on the last day section of Body and Soul and play his solo for you, and then outro on the last day section to end. This Body and Soul.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful. Thank you, Aric. And thanks for joining us today. We look forward to working with you many times in the future and wish you the best of health and happiness.
Dick, thank you so very much. And Bob, thank you both so very much. It's such an honor, and I can't thank you enough for having me be a part of this wonderful project. I wish all of us and you all the best with disseminating this wonderful information to our students, teachers, and to as many people as possible. It's just such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you find the content valuable. We hope you'll join us as part of our Jazz Zone Together online community. Have a great day, and please keep making music.
Bye-bye.